Our next agile model is that of Kanban. So, if you know anything about the Japanese language, this is a very Japanese word. And the reason for this is it was actually developed in Japan. Its origins can be traced back to the UK in Spitfire development, those really nice planes that they developed back then. However, it was popularized, refined, and really implemented into the consumer market with Toyota. And Toyota is a Japanese company. They basically took a look at the current process of making cars and they wanted to make it more situated so everything was available that the car makers in the factory could get. It was all available like it was in a supermarket, and you could go up and grab whatever you needed to complete your process. Basically, they wanted everything for a person to do their job to be within arm's reach. And they wanted a board to track all of the progress, look at the current flow, and to keep improving the flow so they could make more and more and more cars. And it became very popular and it made Toyota very, very successful. Kanban has been since adapted into the software world, and it's the same sort of technique. We want to popularize, or we want to refine our flow. We want to take the flow of cards, of bugs, of features, and we want to find out where the bottlenecks are and keep continually improving on it. And here's a little example of it. A lot of software companies use something like this. So you'll have cards. The backlog is usually the one that's filled up the most. So you'll have a bunch of cards in the backlog. And then when we want to start a project or we want to start one of the cards, we just move it over. So let's say we have a couple in the analyze phase, one in the develop phase, and then maybe we have 4 in the test phase, and then 2 in the release phase. Just from looking at this, we see 2 things. We see we have a lot of stuff to go. There's still a lot left in this project. And we see we have a little bottleneck in the testing phase. There's a problem here. Maybe we don't have enough engineers on testing. Maybe our current testing or our current methodologies with testing are slow or they're not working properly. Maybe there's a lot of bugs or errors that are happening within testing because of poor analysis. We know just from looking at this that there's a problem with the testing phase and that we want to improve the testing phase. And we try to do this in a slow, incremental way. We make a little change, we go through it again, and we see if we're improving this. We're trying to grab these big numbers here. We're looking at what percentage is in the testing column. Maybe right now it's something like 25% of all cards are sitting in here. And so we try to make some changes and we take a look at it in 2 or 3 months and we try to maybe get it down to 15%. Better sort of distribution instead of, there being this large lump and then down and then this large lump and then back down. We're trying to, make it so that it's perfectly level across, so that development is perfectly moving across. And with all of this, we have a couple of core tenets here. We have the Kanban properties and the Kanban principles. The properties are just sort of ideas and things that we might want to follow, while the principles are pretty much locked in stone. These are things that every time you look up Kanban principles, you're going to get this set over here. And so we'll go over these first. So number 1 is start with what do you know. This is important because the Kanban system can be implemented over your current system. It's a way of tracking progress and improving the flow of that progress. So you can technically put it onto anything and keep improving the flow. You could even attach this to like a waterfall method in the correct way and see what's holding you up during that method. With Kanban, the first, again, it's start with what do you know. We don't want to throw out everything and start completely from scratch. What we want to do is we want to put this over, implement a little change. Maybe our change is we're implementing a board like this so that we can actually start tracking progress, and then we move from there. From there, we agree to pursue incremental evolutionary change. What this means is we're not trying to change everything at once. We're not going to look at this and go, well, testing is obviously where the bottleneck is. Let's hire 5 more testing engineers. That's a major change, and it might cause other problems down the road. A more, maybe a better sort of change that we might do is we might say, hey, whoever's working on development, maybe we can have one of those guys every 2 or 3 weeks, spend a couple weeks in testing and jump back and forth. It's a small change. One of our engineers is just going to move roles just for a little bit, back and forth for a couple of weeks every month. And that, then we can test, is that helping, is that hurting, and we'll make more changes based on that. So we want incremental evolutionary change, not giant jumps. We want to respect the current process, roles, responsibilities, and titles. And this is important because we don't want to completely throw out a system just because we think it might be wrong. We want to, again, make those small changes. So we want to respect the current process. We want to respect everything that's going on with our current setup. We want to take a very serious look at them and only make small changes. We don't want to, begin firing people and moving people all around. It creates this fear of instability within the project that'll slow us down even more. So we want to look at the problem, see how we can make it better, and make those small changes. And finally, this one is sometimes added, sometimes not, but I think it's important. Encourage acts of leadership at all levels. What this means is we want to encourage our lowest of workers the same amount as our highest of workers. The lowest of workers, meaning they're just coding, they're not doing a lot of the design process, they're just making changes. We want to make sure that they are being honest and they are being forthright in the way that they're coding. We want them to make really good decisions while coding. So we want to encourage those acts. And leadership here doesn't have to mean that we're actually leading other people. It can mean simply that they are inspiring others because they're working very hard and they're creating very solid and very bug-free code. So we want to encourage that at all levels. And then some of the properties, some of the ways that we can get to these principles is one, visualize the workflow. That's very important with Kanban. We want to put it up on a giant wall or on a website or where everyone can access it so that we can look at the workflow and what is the problem. With this, we obviously see that we have the problem in testing and we need to work with it. Limit work in progress. This is one of the major keys in this, is we want to limit how much work we keep throwing through. We don't want to have all of this work all in progress, because at that point everyone is spread way too thin and we're not making a lot of progress. We're not being able to see the flow because there isn't any flow. Everyone just stopped and only making very tiny steps towards the final product. We're still trying to make this a little bit agile. We're still trying to speed up the development process. So whenever we see something like this, we want to stop any inclusion of backlog and try to work through the current bugs before we introduce any more into the process. Manage the flow. Again, we want to look at the flow and we want to manage it. We want to see where the problems are and we want to change those problems. We want to make process policies explicit, meaning we don't want to just sort of explain to someone, oh, that's how it's done, this is how we do it, sort of like that. We want to have a piece of paper with all of our policies detailed that we can give to people. We want them to be easy to access and explicitly written out. We don't want any gray area anymore. We want something that's very explicit, very easy to find, and very easy to follow. That again, it makes so that all of our engineers are following the process, and if we know that they're all perfectly following the process, we know how to change the process. Because if all the engineers aren't following our policy, it doesn't matter how we make changes to the policy, they're still not going to follow it and no change will actually occur. So we need to make sure that they're following it. The only way to do that is to make it very explicit, make it sure that they can read it, and to enforce it, then we can make changes based on it. And finally, improve collaboratively. What we mean by this is we want to improve as a group. We want to improve collaboratively. Oops, my bad right there. We want to improve together. We don't want to make just small changes top down, meaning the leader looks at it all and says, we're making this change. We want to improve as a group. So we want to have group meetings. We want to have issues brought up. We want to have maybe bring in the stakeholders as well. And we want to have these little meetings, these collaborations about how we're going to improve. Everyone should be involved so that we can keep improving the process, because maybe us as a let's say us as a program manager, we don't understand the problems over here in testing. So we try to implement it, changes in testing by what we think testing is. Well, that's not going to really help us, because if we brought some of the testing engineers in, they're going to better explain to us why there's a bottleneck there. Maybe they're saying we're sending way too much down the pipeline and we're not having enough people to deal with it. Maybe there's processes in the analysis stage where you're actually coming up with the design. Maybe there are errors in development. The developers are they're pencil whipping everything and they're not making good code. We want to talk to the testing engineers. We want to talk to all the engineers to figure out that problem. And so improving collaboratively is a very big part. But Kanban is a really neat sort of way of developing code, and it's a fun way to look at all the visuals and to keep improving every single day, basically.